Welcome back to the podcast playground. Our newest podcast is The Best Podcast.
Join Jay Carter and me, Vida Best, on The Best Podcast, where the dynamic duo brings you their insider secrets to everything wonderful.
Known for their discerning taste, The Best Family has critiqued the finest in entertainment, technology, and lifestyle.
Now Jay and me dive deep into the top 5 everything, from the latest cell phones to affordable wines that won't break the bank.
So tell a friend, you've found The Best Podcast,
where every recommendation is a gem waiting to be uncovered. Tune in weekly for your dose of excellence.
Today we are going to get into something that I think is really important for podcasters, especially those trying to polish their communication and really find impactful language.
Absolutely.
We are talking about overused words.
Yeah.
How can this help us make our podcasts better?
Awesome.
So maybe we can start with a word that I think we all use way too much.
Like
the classic.
I am so guilty of that one.
Oh, me too. But I think it's just one of those words that has become so ingrained in our vocabulary these days.
Mm.
Yeah. And EnglishClass101.com mentioned it's basically a filler word.
Right.
It's like room or
Exactly. And they also pointed out that younger people tend to use it way more than older generations, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, I think it's just become part of the way we speak.
It's true. And I think, from a psychological perspective, using filler words can give us a little bit of time to think.
Yeah.
But it can also make us sound unsure of ourselves.
And less prepared.
Right, exactly.
So it's kind of like a double-edged sword.
It is. So maybe we can think about how we can, break free from this habit.
Yeah, that's a great question. And what are some ways that we can, replace it with something that's more effective?
Well, one thing I like to do is I'll literally just pause.
Yeah.
Just for a second or two instead of saying
right.
It gives me time to think, and it also sounds more deliberate.
So it's about being intentional with our pauses.
Yes. And another thing is to just try to be more precise with your language. So instead of saying it was really cool, you could say it was incredibly cool or it was awe-inspiring.
No, that's a good point. Using stronger, more descriptive words.
Yeah, exactly.
So moving on, both Babbel and Bunny Studio, they both had awesome.
Oh, yes, awesome. Another one of those words that's just everywhere.
Yeah, English Class 101, they mentioned how it's become the generic adjective.
Right, everything is awesome these days.
Right, and it kind of loses its power when we use it for everything.
It does. I mean, if everything is awesome, then nothing is truly awe-inspiring.
That's a good point.
Right, so maybe we can, challenge ourselves to use awesome more sparingly and reserve it for things that are truly exceptional.
So what are some alternatives to awesome that we could use?
Well, depending on what you're trying to describe, you could say something is breathtaking or spectacular or even mind-blowing if it's really amazing.
Love those words.
Yeah, it's all about finding those words that really evoke the feeling you're trying to convey.
That's a great point. Now, English with Aga, in their video, they talked about overused phrases like he said, she said.
Ah, yes. Those are definitely a bit of a cliche.
Yeah, but are they inherently bad, or is it just that they're not very creative?
I think it's more about the lack of creativity. They're not necessarily wrong to use.
Right.
But they can make your podcast sound a little bit, bland.
Flat.
Yeah, flat. So instead of just stating who said what, maybe you can try using more descriptive verbs like exclaimed or whispered or argued, something that adds a little bit more color to your storytelling.
That's a great tip. It's about really immersing the listener in the story.
Absolutely.
And speaking of overused words, 2 other words that both Bunny Studio and Babbel.com mentioned were good and important.
Oh, those are definitely common culprits.
Yeah, and they're so easy to use.
They are. They're those go-to words that we all rely on.
Right.
But the problem is that they can be kind of boring.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. They're just so generic.
Exactly. So instead of just saying something is good, maybe try using a word like exceptional or favorable or superb.
Okay.
Something that really highlights the positive aspects.
And what about important?
Babbel suggested using words like main or chief or principal or even key or major.
So many options.
There are, yeah. It's all about choosing the word that best reflects the specific nuance you're trying to convey.
I'm taking notes over here.
Yeah, good.
This is a masterclass in word choice.
Well, I'm glad you're finding it helpful.
It's so interesting because it's not about using big fancy words.
Yeah, no, not at all.
It's about choosing the right words to convey your meaning clearly.
Exactly. And that's what effective communication is all about.
Now, before we move on to even more overused words and phrases, let's take a quick break.
Sounds good.
We'll be right back with more tips and tricks for polishing your language.
Okay.
And we are back. I feel like I'm already starting to be more aware of the words I'm using. It's crazy how much we rely on these like little crutches in our language.
It really is. And, amazing is another one that both Bunny Studio and Babbel had in their list of overused words.
Oh, yeah. Amazing. Yeah, I use that all the time.
Me too. It's funny how a word that's meant to express like wonder and astonishment can become so like ordinary.
Right, exactly. Like if we use it for everything, it kind of loses its meaning.
Exactly like the Bunny Studio article said, amazing has become such a versatile word that it's lost its impact. We use it for like a good meal or huge scientific breakthrough. Like there's no distinction.
So how can we make sure that amazing actually like conveys that sense of awe when we do use it?
I think it's about being more selective.
Yeah.
Instead of saying that new coffee shop is amazing, maybe try to be more specific. Like, is the coffee exceptionally good? Is the ambiance really cool?
Wow.
Describe what makes it stand out.
Right. Instead of just saying the generic amazing, really say what's so great about it.
Exactly. And what about interesting? I find myself using that one a lot, especially when I'm trying to, engage my listeners.
Oh, yeah. Interesting, for sure.
It's not a bad word inherently, but I think when it's overused, it can kind of make your podcast sound,
Uninteresting.
uninteresting. Exactly. So maybe try using words like engaging or intriguing or even thought-provoking instead.
Oh, I like those. Much better.
Yeah, it's about adding a little more depth to your language.
And unique. Babbel had this one too, and a few others. It's funny that a word that means one of a kind can become so overused, right?
I mean, it's almost ironic, isn't it?
Yeah. Like, is anything really unique anymore if we call everything unique?
I think it's just our natural inclination to highlight what's special or different.
Yeah, and to stand out. Yeah.
Exactly. But I think instead of just saying something's unique, maybe we should try to be more descriptive. What makes it stand out? What are its like defining features?
Yeah, so instead of just saying this podcast is unique, I could say something like, this podcast offers a fresh perspective on current events, or something like that.
Exactly. You're giving your listeners more context, and you're also avoiding that overused word.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, earlier we were talking about how literally is often misused. Are there any other words that are kind of in that same boat?
Ironic is one that comes to mind. People
Yeah.
often use it to describe situations that are just coincidental or unfortunate, but not actually ironic.
Oh, yeah. I hear that all the time. Like, it's so ironic that it rained on my wedding day.
Yeah, but that's not really ironic. It's just bad luck.
Right.
True irony involves a discrepancy between expectation and reality.
Okay.
So, for example, it would be ironic if a fire station burned down.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
So it's about like a twist of fate almost.
exactly. So the next time you're tempted to use ironic, just pause and ask yourself, does this situation really fit the definition?
I will. Now, what about the phrase kind of? I use kind of all the time, especially when I'm trying to be polite or, express uncertainty.
Yeah, kind of is definitely a common one. But like a lot of these phrases, if you overuse it, it can lose its impact.
Okay, so when I want to soften something, what should I say instead of kind of?
Well, if you're trying to soften a statement, you could use slightly or somewhat or partially, or if you're trying to express uncertainty, you could try perhaps or maybe or possibly.
Those are good. I like those.
Yeah, it's just about finding those alternatives that are a little bit more precise.
Okay, and what about sort of? Is that in the same boat as kind of?
Yeah, I would say so. They both kind of make your language sound a little bit hesitant or unsure, which might not be the impression you want to give, especially in a podcast where you're trying to, establish credibility and authority.
That's a good point. It can make you sound less confident.
Exactly. And two words that a lot of people get confused are less and fewer. Have you ever struggled with those?
Oh, all the time. Like, which one do I use when?
Okay, so less is used for things you can't count, like water, time, love.
Okay.
And fewer is used for things you can count, like apples, people, podcasts.
Okay. So less time, but fewer podcasts.
Exactly.
It seems so simple now.
It is, once you know the rule.
This is so helpful. I feel like this whole deep dive has been like a masterclass in word choice.
That's great. I'm glad you're finding it useful.
Yeah, it's like I'm putting together a puzzle, and all these words are the pieces. And like each piece has its own special place.
That's a great analogy. And just like with a puzzle, the more you practice, the better you'll get at recognizing the patterns and finding the perfect fit.
I love that.
Step behind the scenes with Backstage Pass, a podcast hosted by Gentry Thomas, where music legends, sports icons, and movie stars get real about their failures, hard work, and rise to the top. Recent episodes with Kevin Costner, George Lopez, Spike Lee, and Jay Leno, plus over 100 more available. Get your VIP credentials. Backstage Pass, hosted by Gentry Thomas. Download it wherever you get your podcasts.
And we are back for the final part of our deep dive on overused words.
It's incredible how just a few simple words can make a huge difference to how we communicate.
You know, it really is. It's like, when you think about it, it's like adding the right spices to your food.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the right spices can really make the flavors come alive, but if you use the wrong ones or too much, it can ruin the whole dish.
That's a great analogy. So, like a chef who carefully picks their spices, we need to be careful about the words we use to really create the right effect.
Exactly. Now, one word that seems to come up a lot in these discussions about overused words is very.
Very.
I use very all the time. It's like my go-to word when I want to emphasize something.
I get it. It's such an easy word to use, but often it's used as a crutch, you know? Instead of finding a stronger word, we just tack on very to make it sound stronger.
Right. So instead of very tired, I could say exhausted.
Exactly. Or instead of very happy, you could say overjoyed or thrilled.
I like that. Those words definitely sound more powerful, and they create a more vivid picture for the listener.
Exactly. And another word that often gets paired with very is interesting. We already talked about how interesting on its own can be overused, but when you combine it with very, it becomes even weaker.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So instead of saying, that's very interesting, why not try something like, that's fascinating, or that's intriguing, you know? Really think about what aspect of interesting you want to highlight.
That's a good point. Now, I noticed that a lot of these sources also mentioned, you know, as a common filler phrase,
Yeah.
especially in casual conversations.
You know, oh yeah, it can sneak into our speech without us even realizing it. It's okay to use it sometimes to connect with the listener, but when it's overused, it can make you sound less polished.
Yeah, it makes you sound less professional, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So the key is to be aware of how often you're using it and try to replace it with a pause or a more meaningful phrase.
Right. So instead of saying, you know, it's really important to, you could just say it's crucial to.
Exactly.
Now, one word I struggle with a lot is, actually, I tend to use it a lot to clarify or emphasize a point.
Actually, yeah, I see that a lot too. It's a useful word sometimes. But when it's overused, it can become repetitive and make you sound a bit condescending, almost as if you're correcting the listener.
Oh, right. I don't want to sound like that. So how can I avoid overusing actually?
Well, I think it's about being more mindful and asking yourself if actually is really adding value to the sentence.
So if it's not necessary for clarity, just leave it out.
Exactly. It's about making every word count.
I like that. This whole conversation has really made me think about those little words we often take for granted.
It's true. We don't always realize the impact they have.
Okay, so before we wrap up, are there any final thoughts you want to leave us with?
I think the most important thing to remember is that language is constantly evolving. So what's considered overused today might not be overused tomorrow. So we need to stay aware of how language is changing and adapt our language accordingly.
It's like fashion, it's always changing.
Exactly.
Oh.
Don't be afraid to experiment with new words and phrases and find your own unique voice.
I like that. That's inspiring.
And finally, remember that the whole point of communication is to connect with your audience. So choose words that are clear and engaging and authentic to you.
That's perfect. I don't know about you, but I feel like I've learned so much about how to polish my communication skills and make my podcast even better.
I'm glad to hear that.